Hello, and welcome back to Decoding the Game. My name is Amril, and today we've put together a panel regarding the rising cost of user acquisition in the game industry. We recently sat down with Leslie Ronalds, General Manager of Arcade.com, a leader in interactive and creative advertising technology, along with her husband, Alexander Ronalds, CEO of Argon Consulting, providing end-to-end solutions for game developers, and the creators of Loopstats. Here is the largely unedited conversation that followed. Enjoy!
Thank you for joining me. We're here today to talk about changing distribution models, the problem of discovery, and rising cost of user acquisition. And why is that something that's interesting to talk about?
Well, definitely year over year, we've seen a big increase on the cost for installs in user acquisition. This is definitely taking away a focus for the app developers on the game itself and focusing more on the cost it's going to get a big discovery for them and get a big number of users. For us as an ad network, our focus is on getting them the best quality users we can provide for them at the right cost. Now, this becomes an issue of having enough channels and enough impressions to be able to provide for them.
So what would you say the problem is in a nutshell?
I think at this point it's about the amount of placements for the ads, right? We have very limited channels, very limited space, and a huge demand for where we can put place the ads, right? At this point, if you look into any chart, the bigger players, Facebook, Google, some of the ad networks, that's pretty much where most of the apps installs are coming from, right? It's a very limited pool. So, and the pool for app developers that are looking for users is quite big. So that's why the prices are forcing app developers to outbid each other, and that's why the price is going so high.
Right. So ads is, of course, a pretty new way of reaching users. As someone involved with game development, what do you say is causing this new trend in acquiring users through ads, for example?
The trend of rising cost of acquisition. I think there's definitely, I mean, every day the barriers to launching your game on the Android store, the iOS store is coming down. We now have engines like Unity, we have the new language Swift, we have many different ways that kind of 1 to 2 people development teams can launch their app on the App Store. So with the huge influx of new apps, there's more, it's harder to get eyeballs for your app, for your product, and people are paying for impressions, they're paying for downloads, they're paying for, you know, any way they can drive them to the to the app. They're trying to solve the discovery problem. That's helping the cost of discovery rise. That's one of the factors.
What would you say some of the other factors are?
I think also the way people are using their phones is changing. People are now downloading more apps to their phone than they did before. People are less loyal to the apps that they have on their phone, and retaining the users is becoming harder and harder. So not only is the cost of acquisition rising, but also the amount of time that people interact with one app that they've downloaded is decreasing.
I also think this is interesting because I don't think that this is necessarily the first time that developers have been in this situation where it's hard to get eyeballs. I think there have been a couple of changes in distribution models over the time. When I first started gaming, I got games on floppy disks, and that of course had some, you know, very real implications on the size of the game that I can get and how am I going to get exposed to it. How long have you been a gamer for?
I've been gaming my whole life,
right.
since I think I got my Nintendo, my NES when I was 7 maybe.
When you have an NES, how do you get a game? What is that process for people that have more recently become gamers?
Yeah, well, back then, I mean, that was when you're 7 too. It's not exactly like you control the distribution chain of going to the store and purchasing it. But you know, you would go to the store, you'd look at the games, you would occasionally get magazines. Nintendo Power came out around that time, which was one of the first magazines that really kind of, you know, was out there advertising, reviewing games, giving content about games. And it would be about getting my Nintendo Power, looking at my Nintendo Power for what was new, what was upcoming, what games, you know, spiked my interest coming forward, and then trying to get to the store and actually physically buying the product, or waiting for Christmas or a birthday or something like that. But the discovery process there was very much about either going to the store and looking what was available, or reading one of the few distribution channels that there was, like Nintendo Power.
Right. I think there's an interesting irony here that, in some sense, the problem that was solved for many developers with online distribution was the idea that now I don't have to compete for shelf space. Now I can get my game out to everybody, and I don't have to necessarily have publishers involved. I can be an indie developer, and now we've sort of run into the same problem in the App Store, where if you're not featured, it might be really hard to get discovered at all, which is of course where we get these new kinds of models where you have ads inside games, outside games. The kind of developers that could afford ads, where it made sense to buy ads, like back in the 90s, were very few. But now, I mean, I would argue that you sort of have to get ads. So how would you say that the industry has been reacting to the problem of discovery? What are people doing to make sure their games get out there? Let's say you've made a game, you want your first 1,000 users. What do people do?
So first of all, like when you talk about you know, how to solve this issue, right? I think it comes down from the channels. Twitter recently just announced that they're going to be starting as well with Fabric, just becoming sort of another channel for app promotion. This will definitely be a huge help for current app developers to be able to find a new sort of media to be able to place their advertisements. At this point, you know, you have limited places where you can go to. You're a new developer, okay, where do you go? The bigger players most likely, right? Because they'll be able to bring you the biggest amount of installs, and probably, you know, cost-wise, it will be good for the developer. So you probably head over to Facebook, to Google. You pick your top 5 ad networks that are able to provide, you know, a certain 1,000 number of installs for you. That's probably the best way to get. And what we're seeing as an ad network for us is you got a new game. You want to test with a couple thousand users, so they will go and test out a couple of channels and see which one's bringing out the best quality users. So the way developers are now kind of attacking this problem is they're educating themselves more on the channel, on data, on optimization, and this is kind of giving them more tools to be able to pick better who they're going to be trusting with providing installs.
As someone on the developer side, do you agree that this is the way to move forward? If you want your first 1,000 users, it's about having an advertising budget?
There's a couple things you can do. I think that as the cost of user acquisition rises, you know, our options are becoming more and more limited as to what we can actually do. But for a beta test, some sort of small scale beta test where you don't really want to hit some a global marketing campaign, then yeah, acquiring your first couple thousand, your first 10,000 users is really the way to go. Test, make sure your KPIs are in order, and make sure that the game is actually working. If you're talking about launching a game and then, you know, getting that game out there and getting it successful, as an indie developer, you don't really have too many options right now. You have to either buy your users, which is expensive, and in some game genres, maybe not even financially viable. If you have maybe an action game where your lifetime value is lower than like an RPG game, or you have to do something like innovative and rely on Apple giving you a feature or the Android store giving you a feature. There's other things too you can do. You can do Hollywood movie tie-ins. That's become quite popular these days, but that's kind of a beast in itself, you know, generating users because of the marketing budget of the movie going out there, and then Apple will sometimes favor you too if there's a movie that's being launched around the same time. But yeah, as a developer, as an indie developer, it's difficult to get your initial user base on a launch game.
So what would you say? What is the silver bullet, if any, to user acquisition as an indie developer?
I don't think there is any silver bullet. I think that being an indie developer is difficult. I think that you cannot. I think if you're going to be an indie developer, you have to be different. You can't enter the market with a clone of Clash of Clans anymore on the mobile store. Like if you're going to enter and be the 500th clone of Clash of Clans or worth the 500th clone of Candy Crush, that market is just not really there anymore. You have to go in and be kind of something new, something different that's going to stand out above the noise and hopefully garner you a feature with Apple or Android.
I don't know if I agree with you there. I feel that if it was true that innovation was the path to discovery, right? Like people will find your game if you made something innovative. We would see more innovative games in the top 50. And I feel, especially in the top 20, it's typically dominated by bigger players, bigger names that have the kind of budget to be buying users. So I don't know that if what you're saying is true, I don't know that the world will look the way it looks. What would you say? What should an indie developer do?
Well, yeah, I think definitely if you look at today's top apps, right? It is the bigger gaming companies or app companies that are able to spend huge amounts on user acquisition. You do see less and less innovation. I do agree on that point. You do have 20 Candy Crush lookalikes also there, and everybody's starting to look sort of similar. For an indie developer, I think from an ad perspective, I think you would have to sort of pick your markets in a better way, right? Not necessarily go for the US market, which is absolutely saturated. Go for markets that monetize, as good as in the US market, but probably cost for acquisition is not as high, right? Maybe you start looking for Germany, for example, is becoming quite a big target for a lot of developers. Going to Australia, if the language is an issue. Trying to maybe discover different markets other than the US is probably a good way to go about it, as from the cost perspective. The US cost is going to continue to rise. There's very few channels and there's a huge demand. Everybody wants to be in the US top app store, right? So,
what about things like traditional independent media to get discovered? I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently about how to perhaps game the media to get things like reviews, etc. Do reviews still matter? Does it matter to be carried in traditional media?
I think it matters. I think on mobile, it's going to matter more and more going forward. I think that right now, a lot of the games that are very successful on mobile are casual titles, and it's harder to really garner an audience for a casual title through written reviews because casual game players just traditionally don't read gaming reviews. I think that as more core games come to mobile, that kind of culture is going to change, and we're going to see more print media about mobile games as more kind of hardcore games come to mobile.
Right. Wouldn't it then follow that it could be a good idea for indie developers to go for more core games because that's a way to actually get free coverage in the media? I mean, if no one's going to write about Candy Crush, then of course it's going to be hard to get a couple of free users because of a couple of reviews. But if you are making, say, a core game, then wouldn't that be a channel of getting users?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on the developer. Like, just some people, I myself would not go and build a casual game because that's not my background. It's not what I do. Like, is it easier for a core? I think the question that you're asking is it easier for a more hardcore game developer to get users? I think the answer to that is yes. I think the reason for that is that core games monetize better in general. I think also that it's more of a word-of-mouth environment, and more core games have things like guilds, have more social features that go around.
Would you say that there's a difference in the cost of acquiring a casual gamer and a core gamer?
Oh, for sure. Yes, 100%. I think definitely for a core gamer, it's definitely harder to find as well, right? So when you look into the channels that we have as an ad network, most of the apps that you'll see where you have advertisements tend to be casual games. That is sort of the main audience, right? Games like Clash of Clans refuse to have games there, right? Because they already monetize well enough that they don't need the advertisements. Maybe that will take sort of something out of the gameplay, out of the experience. It's some of the arguments that they've given. So to be able to find a core user is definitely a little bit more difficult. You do have to compete with a lot more demand from the casual gamers that are able to acquire users for a lower price. And obviously, given that the placements are mostly casual game apps, the quality of user there for casual games is higher.
Right. I think one of the things that I find very interesting about being on the receiving end of game ads is it seems to me, and I don't really have any data to back this up, just my experience as a gamer, is it seems to me that most of the games that are advertised to me are already in the top 20, top 50. So it seems to me that a lot of what advertising spending is on is not necessarily becoming big, but staying big. Would you say that there's any truth to that, or am I just imagining things?
No, I think definitely the bigger you are, the more money that you have to spend on ad advertisement, and the more users that you want to acquire to continue to stay in the top 10, right? I think I got some data from App Annie that were saying that the top 10 are really the sweet spots where most of the money is coming from. Anything underneath the top 10, the App Store, it's not. There's a big gap there, a big difference in revenue coming from the top 10 versus non-top 10. So you do definitely want to keep investing as much as you can so you continue to maintain your gap there. You have a huge demand and big competition, so the more money you throw in, the bigger chance that you have of staying there.
Right, and you brought up something here about people being less loyal to games than they used to be. And I think there's an interesting causal question to be had there. Are people less loyal to games because we are designing games for less loyalty? Or are we designing games for less loyalty because people are less loyal?
I think that I think in general with the iOS store as it is right now, before this kind of current rise of the cost of user acquisition, it was easy to clone something, get it onto the store, and then buy enough users. You know, the formula was simple. Make sure that your LTV was more than your cost of user acquisition. We've gotten to a point now where there's so many similar games, so many clones of each other on the store that they're all driving up the cost of user acquisition. And at the same time, there's so many of them that people are spending less money on them individually. So the game developers are kind of crunching themselves in the middle, and they're not making as much money for each user.
So what I find very fascinating about this equation of user acquisition, so as someone on the analytics side, I see user acquisition as largely a question about user retention. Like there are two ways of getting to 10 million active users. One is you have enough people coming in through the door, and the other one is making sure that people don't leave. And I feel that over the last couple of years, the word retention is mentioned less and less in industry media. It's more about acquiring users, making sure people come in. It's like the industry has sort of accepted that there's a very high churn rate among players, and I think that at least from the analytics side, we see that a lot of the analytics spending that companies have is actually not from the development team. It's not from the people that are responsible for gameplay experience. It's from the marketing team, right? So the biggest adopters of analytics has certainly been marketing departments, and I wonder if the cart is going before the horse here, and I think maybe what we've seen happen over the last couple of years is as people were cloning, where there was a very simple model, as you said, you clone a game, you buy users, and you have a moneymaker, that people stop designing for loyalty. I'm not entirely sure that the rising cost of user acquisition comes from a decrease in loyalty. I think we've sort of designed ourselves away from loyalty. And I think that the user acquisition in general, the question of user acquisition has turned into a very one-sided thing about getting people through the door instead of how can we hold on to users. So the people that have the most users, the people in the top, going back to the kind of ads that I feel that I'm experiencing, are people paying to stay on top. They're not paying to make me stay in the game. That's not what the ad is about. I mean, we had sort of that with incentivized ads before, arguably. But they're paying to make sure that enough people come in to replace the people that are leaving. Do you think this is a significant change in the way that games are developed?
I think that developers are putting a lot of emphasis on retention. I think they see the crunch that's happening. I think that they understand that they're making less money from the users that are coming in. I think also I've seen situations where one game over a 1-year period without that many updates, the average retention of an acquired user is going down. So a new user today versus a new user a year ago, the retention rate is lower.
That's very interesting.
And I think game developers are very, very aware of this. I think game developers work very hard to design their games to retain their users and put a lot of emphasis on this. And I think they need to also. That has to be a part of the strategy.
Right, so let's get to the need part of this. What should people be doing? What should game developers do to make sure that they can be competitive?
So I think it's really, there's two edges to this that they have to attack this from. One is on the ad network side and managing the ad network. They need to have a very firm understanding of who they're working with, what the ad networks are doing, whether it's an affiliate or whether it's an actual ad network, understanding where the users are coming from, and then benchmarking them against each other. This is no longer about just driving the users into your app and then perfecting your product to make sure you keep them as long as possible. There's also so many ad companies out there now that you're not always 100% sure who you're working with. So I think that's like managing your ad network and having KPIs and data and benchmark to make sure your users are good. But also on the product side, you now need to build games that can retain the users as long as possible.
What does making a good ad campaign entail? So I've just made my first game, right? And I want to get to 1 million active users. How do I even go about acquiring users through ads?
So it comes out to multiple parts, right? So we do have, when it comes into mobile advertising, you get incentivized and non-incentivized, right? For the incentivized, it's clearly a lower value user because
what is an incentivized ad?
Incentivized ad means that the user gets some sort of reward for downloading the app or for taking an action towards that ad. Non-incentivized means that the user has a choice between watching the video or downloading the app or completing the mini game or whatever it might be from the ad that's presented to them. And obviously the quality of different types of ads and the users, it will be very different, right? The incentivized user will help you climb up the charts and will help you acquire a big number of users that will hopefully generate more organic users and more valuable users at that point for a lower cost. The non-incentivized users will be the cost for that is a little bit higher, but arguably the quality of that user will be better because the user gets a sort of preview of what that app that they were going to download is about, and then they make the decision, yes, this is something that interests me or not, and then end of transaction, right? So I think it really does come down to in what point of your marketing you are. If you're just starting off, indie developer, brand new game, it's probably it's better for you to get a big number of users so you get more visibility within the App Store. If you go for a few, that also depends on obviously your budget, right? If you have a big budget, then kind of manipulate both and be able to get big users and good quality. But if you're more advanced, if you have already a few thousand users and you want to continue to maintain that, and you want to continue to keep the good quality in their spend, then obviously the non-incentivized users ads is probably the best way to go.
So it seems to me that we're almost in a situation where indie game developers will have a very tough time competing with larger studios in the casual game space. And I think this touches on partly what you said before, that like partly it's like that's not where your expertise is, but would you advise against indie developers going after the casual market in that they won't have the same advertising spend, they won't have the same opportunities to buy users? Or do you think that the casual space is fair game for indie developers?
I don't think it's really a matter of it being casual or hardcore. I think really what we're talking about here is derivative products. I do not suggest an indie developer goes into the marketplace now with a derivative product. The marketplace is much more mature now than it was a year ago, and the cost of acquisition is rising. Production budgets are rising on derivative products now. You're seeing a lot of studios that are just pumping millions of dollars into creating derivative products. So if you're going to go in as an indie developer full force after and make, let's go with Clash of Clans, another Clash of Clans, you have a lot of competition both on the UA side, both on just retaining your users, and how, when there's 500 clones out there that your friends are all playing different ones, how do you really keep them loyal? So as an indie developer, right now, your options are limited. But I think that being new, being fresh. I recently saw the Monument Valley guys speak. They did an amazing game for iOS, which was just beautiful, very different. And that was their tactic, is that they wanted to rise above the noise. And they did this by just being different, being unique.
So I don't know, I feel sort of like if I was an indie developer, I would almost completely avoid mobile. I think that the indie games that typically get the most exposure have been on platforms like Steam and Kickstarter, targeting core gamers. I think there's something very interesting to be said for why Steam and platforms like Steam and Kickstarter became such a powerful tool for indie developers to get discovered. Because, I mean, here in China, there are thousands of apps and games made every week. It's just absolutely a crapshoot if you're going to get discovered at all. So you have to spend money on advertising. And recognizing that as a reality of the new distribution models, I would make the prediction that indie developers will shy away from the mobile platform unless they're making core games. That the only indie games we see on mobile that will be successful will be core games. And indie developers in general will make core games, and as such, they'll stay on Steam, Kickstarter, where people care about core games. And anyone that gets discovered on mobile will have made a core game, not a casual game. That would be a prediction I would make.
Yeah, I think that I think you're absolutely right. I think that as the cost of as the mobile app stores get more and more competitive, indie developers are going to go back to other platforms. I think it's happening now, actually, already. I think another factor here, which is not spoken about so much, but also lags behind a bit, is that games are expensive, and the investment dollars are primarily on mobile right now.
That is a good point. Do you have any experience with the kind, like what size game studio first approaches a company like yours to talk about advertising? Like what is the typical size of a studio?
Medium to large, because those are usually the ones with the marketing budgets. I think when you look at indie developers, if they haven't taken any investment, they have next to no marketing budget at all. I think at this point, though, like when we're talking about what can we do for indie developers, I think one thing that can come about is having a better understanding of the mobile market and mobile advertising market, right? For example, now we have a new iPhone and it's Christmas time approaching. The cost for an install is just going through the roof. There's bigger channels, there's more opportunity for an app to be downloaded into a new phone, right? There are going to be now kids going from school, and now they'll be staying at home. More eyes to be looking at their game and playing their games, more engaging users. So probably at this time, you know, if an indie developer is looking to market their game, it's probably not a good time because they're going to have to be competing with a lot of very big companies with very big marketing budgets. It's probably best for them to wait after this big spend has happened and then go into maybe next year and then start marketing their game then when there's less competition for them.
I think there's something very interesting and cyclical about this too, because when the iPhone first came out and the App Store first came out, I remember feeling that was a great democratizer, that now you could have indie developers. Now there was a new way for me to consume games made by small studios, and for like the previous 10 years that had become increasingly more difficult. And it's very interesting to see how, at least in my opinion, a lot of these smaller developers are being pushed out of a platform that was very, very beneficial to them originally. Do you think that there's anything with the electronic distribution model in general that is going to end up favoring any particular size of studio? Is electronic distribution the way it is now the final say in distribution, or do you think there will be any changes in the distribution model itself?
I think we're talking about an immature market versus a mature market. Every time there's an immature market, there's a lot of opportunity for indie developers to come in there and do something new, something fresh, something different, smaller teams. As the market matures, that's when people really start caring about fidelity and making sure the fidelity gets higher and higher, and then development budgets start to rise. And you know, as that happens, as more and more content comes there, then the cost of acquiring your user on whatever platform it was rises.
So are you predicting we'll see a boom and bust here of indie developers, where indie developers might not get their full comeback until we get some new interesting device or some new technology where there's a new immature market for them to tackle?
I think that right now we are most certainly in an era where indie developers need to do something new and something different. I think that you know, most recently when the cost of, if we're just going back in time a little while to 2011, when Facebook and the cost of acquiring users on Facebook started to rise, a lot of the social game companies had a really hard time competing. And what they did was they jumped onto the new world of mobile. Right now we're in a similar place with mobile where the cost of user acquisition is rising, but there is no new platform to jump onto at this time. So it's going to be telling over the next few years what happens and what happens to these developers.
Do you have any prediction that you would like to make?
Well, I think definitely more channels will be opening up for mobile specific, right? We now see you know, Twitter trying to come into this new sort of space. I'm sure we're going to end up seeing a lot more participation from the bigger sort of websites or social networks, taking also the ad networks kind of becoming a little bit more diverse and sort of building them, providing a more full sort of package for developers. I don't necessarily think that mobile won't be a focus for either big or small companies. I think mobile is definitely what's pushing us to the next step. So I mean, even for either app developers or brand advertisement, mobile is definitely the focus currently. So I don't necessarily agree with mobile not being the focus, but I do see more channels and more platforms opening up to be able to bring maybe a wider version of users and in a more cost-effective way, depending on the channel that you're looking for.
I actually want to expand a little bit on what you said as well, like there's no new platform for people to go. I don't think that's true. I think that indie developers are going to flock towards things like the Oculus, and I think that's why the Oculus was worth so much to Facebook. Facebook understanding that, okay, we were the social stuff, people moved on, then people went to mobile. Facebook never really had time to figure out how mobile was going to work, and now people are moving away from mobile, or they will eventually. Where are they going to go? And I think they bought themselves a ticket to whatever's going to happen next by betting money on this as a new platform that indie developers will go to.
Right. I hope that the next trend is that indie developers move to something like Oculus. I have concerns that just isn't going to be as mass market as, say, mobile or Facebook is, simply because Facebook, it was free, people were using it, people were chatting. Mobile, everybody really has a phone. I don't think people look at the...
Just a few years ago, that wasn't true. I mean, when indie developers first came to mobile, mobile was also a niche market, right? You would have been better off targeting desktops or consoles.
Right. I think that we also knew that it was growing, though. We knew that it was going to grow quickly. Whereas if we had targeted consoles in that age, we knew that that was in a declining phase. Again, this comes back to investment dollars, too. There was just a lot more investment dollars going into mobile because the VCs could also see the growth of the platform. My concerns with Oculus would be that it's going to be a device that people are going to have to buy. It's going to be an entertainment device. It's not going to be something like a phone, which is kind of a necessity. We'll see, though. I mean, I do hope that your prediction is correct, because I would really love to see Oculus, like a VR system, become the next wave of gaming platforms.
Let me say this. It's not that I'm predicting that the Oculus will be big. I'm predicting that's where the indies will go. I think the indies will be squeezed out of mobile. I think the only space where indies will be able to compete, where they are able to compete today, is within core games. I think indie developers are dependent on traditional media. I think they're dependent on, because they don't have advertising budgets. They need to be covered by Polygon or whatever. Someone needs to write about them for people to find out, or they need to have some amazingly fun viral mechanic. And I think that era is over as well, right? So either the era of the indie developer is over for a while, or they will move on to another platform. And I think the only other candidate there is for another platform at this point is the Oculus. I don't know what other platform they could be moving to. But I also think that we'd get the same cyclical thing happen on the Oculus, where after a while people will focus on fidelity and we'll have the big studios just making better Oculus games. And again, there will just not be a space for indie developers.
Right. So hold on, are you arguing that at this point we've gotten mobile, it has already matured and it's a mature market, and then therefore we've reached fidelity to the point that...
I think mobile is somewhat mature, and I'd like to draw a historical parallel to like the end of the 90s. So many people have described the end of the 90s as like the golden age of gamers, and we had a lot of like really great games that were made between like 94 and 2002. And what I would say happened that ended that era were a couple of things. So there were changes in distribution model, but also a very interesting thing that happened is that people tended to fall into a different genres of games. So like RPGs became, like there were RPG games and first-person shooter games and MMOs. And those were the kinds of games that could get a lot of players, right? So what ended up happening is that people only made those kinds of games, and it became a Fidelity War where it made more sense to reinvest in making another World War II shooter, which I think like that's the end of the golden age of games right there, when people started making World War II shooters. If you have to draw a line in the sand anywhere, it's like, yeah. When people started making World War II shooters, we jumped the shark, and we started competing on graphics, and game mechanics started stepping back. And I think a similar thing is happening on mobile right now, where there are a couple of genres that are starting to dominate. And it's part of the whole cloning thing. It's not just that people are cloning successful games. There's starting to be a pattern in what kinds of games are successful, what kinds of games people want to play on mobile. So I mean, without trying to be funny, I mean, there's only a matter of time before World War II shooters make their entrance on mobile, and we're going to just repeat that cycle. I think the Fidelity War on mobile is starting, and indie developers are going to lose.
Absolutely. I think we're there right now. There's the cost of creating new content on mobile. The cost of some of these new games is skyrocketing. The cost of development is increasing, and it's because people are trying to compete on a fidelity level. You're seeing very similar to what happened on console, where the cost of development increased so much that the studios got more and more risk averse, right. And they didn't want to create new types of intellectual property. They didn't want to create new kind of core mechanic loops, because they knew the P&L on a shooter. They knew how to make that game profitable, and they knew what their risk ratio was. They weren't, when you're running with a $20 million development budget on a console game, which small for many console games too, you don't want to take risks. You become so encumbered by your costs that you can't really innovate anymore. And we're seeing that right now on mobile.
From an advertising point of view, do you think that this kind of in-app advertising will become a better way of advertising than the traditional advertising venues of billboards and magazine ads? Is this just a better way of advertising, or is it another way of advertising?
No, I think again, emphasizing the other point, that mobile is a especially for advertising, it's becoming such a great tool. For apps, and now we're expanding into brands. Another issue that I was reading about why CPI costs are rising is because now app developers are not only having to fight with app developers for the space of the ad, but they're having to fight with brands, which obviously have a much bigger budget for marketing. Yeah. So I think definitely mobile will continue to be a huge platform for advertising. May that be for apps, or may that be for brands or other sort of products. The main reason for this is how easy it is to access things from your mobile device. If you're advertising, let's say, a car, you can request a test drive from your mobile device. If you're advertising an app, you can download it from your mobile device. If you're advertising a new perfume, you can buy it from your mobile device. So I think advertisement in mobile are just getting started. This is something we're now seeing different types of ad forms. We're seeing more native ads, which are just ads that have the same look and feel as the app, giving it a better user experience for the users of the said app. So I don't see advertising moving away from mobile. I see more focus on mobile.
I think the last thing that I would like to discuss with you too is, so okay, if these things are happening on the distribution side, will this continue to have an effect on the business models of the game developers? I think with the social era, we saw a comeback of what for me was very familiar with, like the old shareware model. It was called freemium this time around, right? You get a little bit of the game and then you have to pay. And we've been trying around with freemium and free to play. And I remember last year, 2 years ago, people were predicting that maybe that would be on the way out. Do you think that on the business model side of things, that there's going to be a change as the distribution gets more difficult as well? Or is freemium and free-to-play still the thing that's going to be happening moving forward?
I think that if we can guarantee anything about the games industry is that it's always changing. And as the distribution models, there will always be change to the business models that surround games. I think that, but do I pretend to know what the next iteration is?
Please, pretend.
No, I don't know what the next iteration is going to be. But following the trend of what we saw in the late '90s with console, it's that's developers will they will consolidate. The large developers will consolidate and become bigger pieces of that top chart, and the indie developers will become smaller and more fraction on the bottom. And innovation will come from the indie developers.
What do you think of like subscription models that happen on MMOs coming to mobile?
I think that with mobile, it's really all about reducing that barrier to entry. Like you have you're trying to keep your users loyal on the phone. I don't particularly see subscription coming back, coming to mobile in the near future, but you never know.
What do you think, Leslie? Will people stick to freemium, free to play, or is there going to be a comeback of paid upfront content?
I think it kind of depends on who you're targeting to, right? I think for a lot of us currently, the reason why casual games are so popular is because mobile device is sort of a time killer, right? You're sitting waiting in line, you're playing with your phone, you're in the subway, you're playing with your phone. If you're making it more into, okay, now you have to pay for this, well, there is so much more demand there that I don't necessarily have to pay for that, it's more cost building that sort of loyalty, I guess, and subscription requires a big loyalty or a big user base to be able to kind of monetize that, and I don't really see that happening now or in the near future for that matter.
I'd spend $1 or $2 on a new business model coming in the next 1 or 2 years, and it's not necessarily on the developer side, but through people like WhatsApp and WeChat. Because you've both played 2048, I'm guessing. Like that game went ridiculously viral here in Beijing and a lot of other places, right? And a lot of the time, the way people discovered that game was because people posted, their high score as a photo on WeChat or some other social media. And I think one thing that is missing in that Discovery channel right now is a straight download link right there in WeChat for this is the game. Right? Basically, image recognition. Oh, this person is playing 2048. That's what this picture is. I can recognize that this is 2048. So I will put a download link right here, and I will charge for that. It actually surprised me that that's not really being done already, because that's one of the main ways that people discover casual games, right? Oh, my mom just posted that she got a score of this much. I have to beat my mom. That's just how it works. But when I first saw 2048, I had to find out, what is this game? I had to go ask someone, what is this game? How do I find it? Right? So I'd bet $1 or $2 on places like Facebook, WeChat, the social networks where you do share these kinds of images. That just like YouTube, recognizes what music is in the background, and they provide a link to Amazon or the iTunes Music Store. That the same thing is going to happen where they provide a link to the App Store. This is the game that they're playing. You can download it here and then charge for that click.
Charge who?
Charge the app developer. So I'd see that as a future competitor of ads. That
I think
there's a few issues technology in the tech side for that, right? How are you tracking? How do you know that the platform that they're charging for this install actually came from a picture that your mom posted? So it's not coming directly from.
I don't know. I feel that's sort of throwing stones in a glass house there. I mean, attribution is a big problem with advertising as well. And I think if you have a straight, unique URL in Facebook, because Facebook recognizes the image of 2048 and has provided a download link, then they are pretty much on equal footing with you guys on being able to do attribution on that.
But then you're separating, you're making that line even farther down, right? Because how do you know that your mom didn't post that from, reshared it, that her friend got that picture and then she reshared it and then you saw it?
It doesn't really matter, because the money is not going to my mom, right?
Sure, but then how can Facebook, in this case, go back to the app developer and say, that download down the road, that actually came from us because he saw the picture that she reshared.
But it's not about seeing the picture, it's about clicking the link. So the thing that is not happening today is, like, if I post a screenshot of 2048 on WeChat, with what people in Beijing do, right? You post it on WeChat, that's it. I have to go ask what this is, right? Which is the same thing as basically seeing an ad, right? When my mom posts a picture of 2048, that's an ad for 2048, but there's no call to action. There's nothing that I can do. If there was a download link right there that took me straight to the App Store, that's the attribution right there. There's a unique URL that I clicked in my mom's WeChat feed that led me to the App Store, and I then pressed download. I would argue that that's actually one step less than you have to do with the advertising. So I think it's only a matter of time before social networks wise up and do the same thing that they've already done for music for games.
I think, we definitely would need a complete new sort of tracking tools, third parties, right? Because that's, as you mentioned, with CPI or user acquisition campaigns, there is sort of that need to be able to make it more clear, right? And that's why all these third parties have come up. You have to have a has offers now to be able to track that. I think with what you're mentioning, the line is even a little bit more sort of, in a way, broader than, and it's harder for somebody like us to say,
well, it would be a very safe prediction to say that in-app advertising is definitely not going away. I think the Pandora's box has been opened on that.
Yeah.
Right.
So, being a gamer in the 90s did not mean being exposed to ads, but I think that's not going away.
No.
Right.
I completely agree.
And I think, especially in the West, I think a lot of the indie game developers grew up playing games, and I think there's been an emotional aversion to advertising as well for the indie developers, that they don't want to advertise. They're not in that business. They just want to make games and they just care. So the only kind of advertising that they've been okay with is, things like Kickstarter.
Right.
And I think that indie developers are going to have to either, just suck it up and start spending money on advertising, or just realize that they cannot compete on certain platforms. Any final thoughts from anyone, or should we wrap this up?
I guess, yeah, it kind of comes down to investment dollars, right? You have to have sort of cash in the pocket to be able to start as an indie developer, for sure.
Or you have to be innovative and garner the features from the Apple Store, you know, be able to get the press written about you, be able to get free forms of user acquisition.
Or use data to design a really good game and make sure people don't leave. I think in summary, there are generally three approaches to user acquisition. I think you do have to spend money to get people through the door. And I think you're absolutely right that it is very important to be innovative, to have a chance at being featured. You can't be a copycat indie anymore. And I also think it's true that people have to learn to spend time and effort making sure that their game will actually hold on to their users, that retention is really important. With that, I'd like to thank both of you for your time. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I look forward to seeing both of you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This video was brought to you with the generous support of the Global Mobile Game Confederation, a supporter of the mobile game industry and organizer of Asia's leading mobile game conferences. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel by clicking the link below. If you want to see more speakers like this, visit www.gmgc.info to find a conference near you. See you next time!